Thank you.
Your live, Chair.
Welcome everyone to today's meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee, which is being held fully remotely and in accordance with temporary legislation changes to allow the Council to continue to operate in an open and transparent way. Decisions made at today's meeting are just as applicable as in a traditional meeting setting, provided the number of members in attendance ensures the meeting remains quorate. I'd like to remind members this meeting is being live streamed to the public. Can I request that you all switch off your cameras and mute your microphones when you are not speaking, and also ensure that you have your chat bar open for voting purposes. I'm going to move straight on then to the first item on the agenda, which is apologies for absence. Do we have notified apologies?
I haven't received any apologies for today, Chair.
Okay, good. If there are any other apologies that need to be recorded, please make this clear in the chat and they'll be recorded in the minutes. So we go on to declarations of interest. Members are to indicate expressions of interest in the chat. The chair will invite a member to speak to explain the nature of the interest, and we'll see what the nature of the interest is. So the next item on the agenda is the public open forum. Now, members of the public wishing to participate would have to notify their intention in advance of the meeting, and a member of the public would be sent details of how to join. No such interests have been expressed to date, so far as I am aware. So we'll move on then to the action list from the previous meeting. There are two actions. Now, the anti-bribery risk assessment, I believe, will now be taken at the meeting on the 31st of March. And this is because a number of scheduling issues within the authority makes it not available at the moment. And the Governance and Audit Committee review is now on the agenda at item 11. I'm going to move on to the next agenda item, which is the overview of performance management arrangements. And I think this is down to Richard Jones, the performance manager, and Emma Davis to introduce. So I'll hand over to you, Mr. Jones, to introduce your paper.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, members. So report today is to provide members with an overview of the Council's performance management arrangements and an update on their effectiveness. It also provides the committee with an overview of the Council's planned self-assessment process to meet the requirements of the Local Government Elections Wales Act 2021. I don't propose to go through all the detail in my introduction, Chair, but if I just guide members through the key constituent parts of the report, and then happy to take any questions that arise. So the Council has an established performance framework in place, and this is a way in which we translate our purpose into action and ensure everyone is pulling in the same direction to deliver our outcomes we've set as a Council. Hopefully most members will be familiar with the framework, but it's appended again in Appendix 4, showing that the various parts and how they connect together. So in the report, the main body of the report in Appendix 1 provides an appraisal of the arrangements to make up the current performance framework to ensure that you as a committee are able to take an overview of their effectiveness. And in addition to our performance arrangements, Appendix 2 provides a further assessment of the effectiveness of our decision-making arrangements. And for each of those arrangements, the update provides the purpose, an assessment of the current position, and any key future actions we intend to take to strengthen them or develop them further. And each of one of them has also been scored based on the Council's self-evaluation framework, ranging from level 6, excellent, to level 1, unsatisfactory. The report also provides an update in relation to some changes that we made for the last couple of years. Particularly the Council's performance management arrangements have been adjusted throughout the pandemic to facilitate things like service planning, performance management and risk management. That has a particular focus on what needs to happen when and ensure that progress can be monitored in a robust and transparent way through that time. And you'll see for the update we provided details of how they've changed and how effective we feel they were in the changes we made during that time. And then also recently, as I already mentioned, we've had changes introduced as a result of the Local Government and Elections Act. And I know the committee has received various updates on the implications of the changes to the legislation, both in terms of how it affects Governance and Audit Committee, and also in terms of how it affects wider council arrangements. And in terms of our performance management arrangements, there are two main changes due to the Act. The first one being the requirement to complete a self-assessment and publish a report on the outcomes of that self-assessment once in each financial year. And the second one being a once in electoral cycle panel performance assessment, which will be undertaken by an external panel appointed by the council. An Appendix 3 gives you an update on how we propose to complete the council's first self-assessment report under the Act, which will be assessing performance in the 21-22 financial year. A Governance and Audit Committee have an important role in contributing the report. A draft of the self-assessment report will be made available to the committee, and the committee is able to make any recommendations for changes to the conclusions or action the council intends to take in response to it. And we anticipate that this report will be brought forward to the committee around the June or July meeting cycle. And in addition to implementing the process set out in Appendix 3, a key part of our work will also be looking to develop an evaluative culture within the organisation to support this and ensure that the changes are embedded within service areas, in addition to the whole authority process will undertake at a more corporate level to complete it. So Chair, I wanted to give that background to the report. I haven't gone through any detail, but hopefully the report gives members some updated understanding on the effects of our current arrangements, and I'm happy to take any questions in line with the recommendations. And also my colleague Emma Davis on the call, who's a joint author on the report, and equally able to answer any questions.
Thank you, Richard. We are now inviting members to provide any comments, observations, or ask any questions that they may wish to ask. I'll just say that I thought this was quite an important paper so far as the Governance and Audit Committee is concerned, because I think it does set out the new arrangements really for the performance management arrangements following on from the Local Government and the Elections Act. So I think it's a timely paper for us to have, and on my reading it sets out clearly what the arrangements will be. I did have one query, which was about the panel performance assessment, which I think is referred to in Appendix 3. This would be a set of independent assessors, is that right?
Yes, that's correct. So the two processes are an annual self-assessment process, which will be the council self-assessing its own arrangements and using a wide variety of evidence to do so. The panel performance assessment would be a once in electoral cycle activity that would look to appoint external experts to come in and assess the council's arrangements. Equally, that be informed by a range of evidence, and also include other external views on the council from bodies such as auditors, regulators, and inspectors as well. But the panel performance assessment will have its own role in assessing the council's performance and arrangements and outcomes.
Thank you. Well, I'm not seeing any hands raised at the moment. I'll just give it another few seconds. Looks like your paper is has not raised any queries or questions from members. We'll just note the recommendations that members use the update provided to inform their understanding of the effectiveness of the operation of the authority's performance management arrangements, and to identify any areas where they feel action needs to be taken or further information. So in the absence of any further interventions, I would say that the committee has accepted the recommendations as put down in your paper. So thank you very much. I'll move on then, if I may, to the next two items on the agenda. We've got Item 6 was the Audit Wales annual audit summary, and the next paper is about the Audit Wales work programme and the council progress update, which is in a way a response to the Audit Wales paper. So I'm going to invite Audit Wales to introduce their paper, and then I'm going to ask Mr. Jones and Emma Davis again to speak to their papers before we go on to questions and comments from members. So looks like we've got Charlotte Owen here to present the paper on behalf of Audit Wales.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so every year Audit Wales is required to publish a summary of the audit work that we've completed at the Council during the year, and this document summarises the work that we've completed and reported on during 2021. The first section provides some contextual information about Monmouthshire and sets out the Auditor General's duties. Following this, there's a summary of the accounts audit work and also the performance audit work that we've issued reports on in 2021. There's also a summary of the outputs from CIW and ESTIN. All the reports referred to in the summary have already been considered by the committee at previous meetings, so I don't intend to run through those now. There are links in the summary to the full reports if you wanted some more detail. The final section then sets out the planned work for 21-22 financial year that's currently underway, and we'll be bringing those reports to the committee over the next few months. I think that's probably everything I want to say about the summary, given it's just a summary of work we've already done and that you've already seen. There's probably not much detail to go into, but very happy to take any questions. Also just wanted to take the opportunity to thank all the council officers that have been involved in our audit work over the last 12 months as well. So thank you to them for all their input and support. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Charlotte. I thought it was a useful summary which will help members understand the work carried out by Audit Wales during the year. And I agree with you that all or most of the reports referred to have already been brought before the Governance and Audit Committee. But I want to now turn over to the performance management team to introduce their paper, which is the next item on the agenda, and we'll take any comments and questions after that. So it looks like we've got Emma Davis here to present. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Thank you, Chair. Yeah. Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, members. This report is to provide an update on the progress the Council is making against the Audit Wales work programme up to February 2022, so that you can be assured of the effectiveness of the Council's response. And this report builds on the last one that you received, which was presented to you in July 2021. As you'll see from the report, the Council has undergone one new local study since the last version of it that you received, and this relates to a waste procurement process. And Audit Wales concluded that the process worked well and no statutory recommendations or proposals for improvement were made specifically in this review. The report also contains progress updates on existing proposals for improvement that remain open, and also a management response in relation to the waste procurement review that I've just mentioned. It also contains information regarding the national reviews that Audit Wales have completed in recent months that are most applicable to us as a local authority. Although they're not reporting about Monmouthshire County Council specifically, those reviews of greatest relevance have been shared with the most appropriate service area to consider the findings, and a management response has been provided. The annual audit summary, which Charlotte has just presented from Audit Wales, outlines the work that Audit Wales have completed in the last 12-month period. The summary confirms that the Council has met its remaining Local Government Wales measure duties for 2020-21, which will be the final year in which this assessment takes place. Our intentions for the new process under the Local Government Elections Act has just been shared with you in the overview of performance report. The reviews identified within this report are presented to Governance and Audit Committee as they are produced throughout the year, so members will already be familiar with them, and they're also available on the Council's hub for members to review should they wish. So thank you for your time. That's all from me, and happy to take any questions, Chair.
Again, thank you very much, Emma Davis. Just waiting to see if anyone who wants to make a contribution or ask any questions. I do have one question, which really an observation, really, or some explanation I'd like to have. In your Appendix 3, You've got some closed proposals for improvement from the Audit Office. One, for example, on child poverty, listing various policy changes that have been implemented. But this clearly is an ongoing matter, is it not? So what would be the plans for monitoring whether there had been real improvement as we go along? I'm asking about the status of closed proposals here.
Yeah, certainly, Chair. Audit Wales have got the ability to come back and carry out follow-up reviews on any area of work that they've covered previously as they wish. And in fact, two of the reviews that we've got contained in this report, the environmental review and the leisure services, they're both in fact follow-up reviews where Audit Wales have come back just to check on progress of their original recommendations. So that's from their perspective, and internally from our perspective, all information contained in reviews in regards to proposals for improvement or suggestions for improvements going forward are contained within the service business plans. So service areas can monitor any areas that they need to be working on and ensure that the adjustments are implemented as necessary.
Thank you for that. Well, we've still got an opportunity for contributions from members, should they wish to indicate. Councillor Eason, you'd like to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And the two items 5 and 6 are taken together. And on the Audit Wales report that was given to us, one key fact is Monmouthshire County Council has none of the most deprived 10% of areas in Wales. What are the criteria used to measure a deprived area? Basically, Monmouthshire is generally a rural area, but there are rural deprivation as well as urban deprivation. I don't know who's going to answer that, whether it's Wales or Emma, is it? Or Charlotte, is it?
I'll come in and answer it as best as I can. Not an expert on this by any means. There is a really useful section of the Welsh Government website on the Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation, which will give you a lot of information. I'd recommend going to look at that. There's an interactive map, so you can click on Monmouthshire and then sort of zoom in on sort of specific areas and see that. The obviously in this summary, the central team have chosen to comment on the highest 10% areas of deprivation, of which there are none in Monmouthshire. But if you go to the tool on the Welsh Government website, it will let you filter that by sort of the top 20%, 30%. And at that stage, you will start to see parts of Monmouthshire cropping up. You can also filter it by different types of deprivation as well. So there's various different sort of summaries on there. And when you start to filter it by that, again, you will start to see Monmouthshire cropping up in that as well. I think Richard wants to come in. He probably knows far more on this than I do.
It'd be useful. It'd be useful.
Yep, happy to let Richard talk.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Charlotte. I agree, helpful explanation of Charlotte about the Wales Index of Multiple Deprivation. Just perhaps to give it more context for Councillor Eason about how the work we're undertaking in Monmouthshire around poverty and inequality and the various range of data and evidence we use to assess it. Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation is definitely one, but we know in Monmouthshire that some of the headline statistics can be able to shine light on the various levels of deprivation and inequality through work and data analysis done, for example, to inform the social justice strategy and also the poverty and inequality action plan. We were able to get a better understanding about where areas of poverty and deprivation are, and also importantly then how we can look to plan to help and support those areas accordingly. So it's just give Councillor Eason that understanding that the Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation as used by Audit Wales in the report, and Charlotte's helpfully updated on is one of those useful areas, but we certainly take counter a range of other evidence, both in terms of national statistics as well as our own more locally focused service data to get that deeper understanding of our communities.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll have to look at that index then. Thank you. Yeah.
Do we have any more interventions or contributions? Well, apparently not, so I'd like to thank Charlotte Owen and Emma Davies for their presentations. We have recommendations on the on Richard and Emma's paper. Members scrutinise the Council's response to the Audit Wales work programme, seeking assurance adequate progress is being made. And members refer on any issues contained within Audit Wales national studies to other committees for consideration where they identify there are findings of particular relevance to the Council. I'm not getting a feeling from the meeting about the second of those recommendations being needing to be acted on, but we have been informed of the possibilities of passing things on. But I think we can say that the meeting has accepted, noted the recommendations as made in regard to this paper, the Audit Wales Work Programme Council Progress Update. So thank you very much everyone for taking part in that. The next item on the agenda, item 8, is the 2023 Capital Strategy and the 22-23 Treasury Management Strategy. So if Jonathan Davis is here, I would like to ask him to introduce this paper.
Good afternoon, Chair, and good afternoon, committee members. Yes, the report that we bring into the committee brings together the capital strategy and the Treasury Management Strategy. It's the first time that we've brought these strategies alongside each other to this committee. Previously, they would have been separate, and the reason for that is mainly around the fact that the capital strategy and programme of investment very much drives our Treasury policy. So, as a net borrower, you know, our borrowing is defined by the capital investment that we make. So, you know, these two strategies are inherently linked. I think the first point to note is that in terms of the capital strategy, this really sets out the longer term context for our capital investment as an authority. It goes through details of how we prioritise investment, taking into account the various corporate plans that we've got in place to support those, and how we demonstrate that we're providing value for money, affordability and prudence within that investment. So I think the first thing to say is probably that, you know, a lot of the details in the strategy are very much a prescribed format. It's a heavily regulated area, and I'm certainly not going to go through all of that detail with the committee this afternoon. But just to give you a flavour of, I guess, the main points coming out of the strategies that are being put forward for next year. Firstly, in terms of the capital strategy, you'll note there in terms of the covering report how the capital investment for next year and medium-term financial plan is due to be financed. So in paragraph 3.10 there, we cover off the various sources of financing, and I guess members will note the reliance at the moment on borrowing compared to other sources of finance, and that's mainly due to the investment taking place at the moment in terms of the Future Schools programme. But also I think it's important to note that in terms of funding from external sources, that very much tends to come in post-budget setting. So we'll be expecting to see a lot of the grants and contributions being agreed as we move during next financial year. So you know, this is very much how we're setting the budget at the moment in terms of that table, but that will change as we move through the year. The revenue impact of that borrowing that I've outlined there is shown in the following table in 3.11, and that broadly shows that financing costs as a proportion of the overall revenue budget are remaining fairly constant at just over 6%, and that does, as it notes there, remain sustainable in the context of the authority's overall revenue budget, because those costs are factored in to our medium-term financial planning. In terms of capital receipts, and I think this is probably a key area to highlight for the committee, members will note there the reduction in forecast receipts, probably past the end of this year, but notably then past the end of next financial year 22-23, so it drops off quite significantly, and that's as a result, as it outlines there in 3.16 of the replacement local development plan not proceeding as quickly as envisaged, and that's going to have a substantial impact on generating those receipts, which have been used in the past to support capital investment, and in latter years also be used to support the capital programme, revenue budget, sorry, in terms of capitalisation directive. I think finally, probably in terms of the capital strategy, just looking at the capital medium-term financial plan, which is outlined there in paragraph 3.18. That is the budget as it stands that is going forward for recommendation both to Cabinet on the 2nd of March and Council on the 3rd of March. And certainly what that represents is additional investment for next year, looking to, I guess, meet some of those longer term investment requirements around highways infrastructure, IT infrastructure, and our homelessness situation in terms of our housing pressure in that area. So you'll notice slightly higher investment in that first year compared to others at the moment. So we are looking to prioritise some investment in those areas. In terms of the Treasury management strategy,
Jonathan, sorry, can I interrupt? I see that Phil Murphy, the Cabinet member who's on the committee, has raised his hand, and I wonder whether the intervention he wants to make may relate to the capital strategy. So I'm going to invite Phil Murphy to speak now.
I can do, Chair, thanks. Well, it's sort of half and half, really, John. Given the fact that we're likely to get less capital receipts than ideal for all of the reasons we know about, with the replacement LDP being held up and phosphates and goodness knows what else, I'm just wondering about, and I know we've had guidance from Arlene closer on this, of the borrowing strategy with interest rates going up. I noticed that we've taken another £20 million worth of longer term borrowing, which will obviously give us a bit more of a cushion against increased interest rates. But while you're giving the presentation, can you just satisfy not sufficient cover, particularly in the medium term financial plan for increased interest rates? Thanks for that.
Okay, I'll hand back to Jonathan then to continue.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Councillor Murphy. I'll certainly come on to that as I go through the Treasury strategy. I think firstly, just to outline that, as I said at the start, our Treasury management strategy really is driven by our capital investment. We are a net borrower as an authority. The strategy itself, as I said, is heavily regulated. We are required as an authority to ensure that our capital investment is affordable, prudent and sustainable. And just to note that for next financial year, the Governance and Audit Committee, as it outlines there in paragraph 4.4, will continue to be the delegated body that receives Treasury management information. That'll take the form of a in terms
I'm sorry, Jonathan. I just lost sound there for the your last sentence or so. Perhaps you may like to repeat it.
Apologies, Chair. Yeah, I've had some sound issues today. So yeah, I think I was just outlining that in paragraph 4.4 that Governance and Audit Committee will continue in its role as the delegated body to scrutinise and receive Treasury management information during the financial year. That will take the form of a semi-annual report midway through, and also a report following the close of the financial year. Just briefly then, in terms of the main areas of our Treasury strategy, the minimum revenue provision policy remains unchanged from 2021-22. The policy continues to remain prudent in that we are spreading the borrowing costs over the life of the assets that that borrowing is supporting and financing. In terms of the borrowing strategy, we are continuing to maintain borrowing and investments below their underlying levels. The committee will have heard in the past that we term that as internal borrowing. Councillor Murphy alluded to some longer term borrowing that we'd taken out recently. That was in December last year. We took advantage of a dip in PWRB rates to lock into some an average around 48 years, I think, of borrowing at some historically low rates. What that does do is give us some certainty over revenue budgets in the medium term. The important indicator for us is to keep a balance, I guess, in terms of not being overly exposed to any interest rates in the short term. So we're keeping a balanced mix of those, and that limits our exposure in the short term to some of those interest rate rises that we're likely to see over the next financial year. And you know, all news at the moment is pointing towards those interest rate rises. But what I would say is that our advisors are currently saying that those rises are probably going to be limited, and the policy committee from the government is going to be held back by the fact that you know, significant rate rises in the current economic environment is going to be difficult for them, given the position of household financial situations, and both those of businesses as well, who are just on the back of COVID recovery. So we've certainly got to have an eye on those interest rate increases on the horizon, but I think we're well balanced in terms of our borrowing mix at the moment. Just finally, Chair, in terms of our investment strategy, our strategy continues in line with the current year, 21-22. There's no major changes at all to it. But just to note there, as it says in paragraph 4.14, we are continuing to increase our diversification into high yielding asset classes. That's a mouthful. And these are what we term pooled funds. And as it says there, at the time of writing, we've got 4 million held in pooled funds. And we've got applications in process to invest a further 2 million by the end of March 2022. I think I'll leave it there in terms of the key messages, Chair, and would just invite the committee to ask any questions on the strategies themselves. So, time.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. I'll now invite comments and observations from members of the committee. I have one for you. I think it's at 318. The forecast expenditure on schools is negligible after 22-23. Is this simply because future developments are going to, haven't yet been decided on, or because they're going to be funded in other ways, or is that a clear thing that there are going to be changes in capital expenditure in regards to schools after 2022-23?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I think, as you'll be aware, we're currently in the process of our third comprehensive development of Abergavenny 3 to 19 school. Future investment past that project at the moment, it will very much depend on the funding coming forward from Welsh Government to match that ambition from the authority to complete the Future Schools programme. So what we would expect to see as we move through the medium term is for that additional investment to come on stream. But I think the table that you mentioned in the report just outlines the current position and the fact that that hasn't been agreed as yet at cabinet or council level, and that will change, as those aspirations are clarified in time. So that very much just reflects that fact, Chair.
Thank you. I hope that's clear to everyone. Right, I'm still waiting to see if we have any more interventions or comments from the members of the committee. Of course, the committee has considered Treasury management in detail in the past on numerous occasions. We're probably all well versed into what the arguments are for short-term, long-term borrowing and so on, and the issues of interest rates and inflation, which I think you've explained what the implications might be for changes in those areas. So unless there are some further interventions which to be made, I'll just note the recommendations then, that the Governance and Audit Committee considers and endorses for onward circulation and approval by Fund Council the draft capital strategy for 22-23 as found in your Appendix 1. And the Governance and Audit Committee considers and endorses the onward circulation and approval by full council of the draft Treasury Management Strategy as found in Appendix 1, including the 22-23 minimum revenue provision policy statement and the 22-23 investment and borrowing strategies. And also that the Governance and Audit Committee continues to review the Council's Treasury activities on behalf of the Council by receiving the mid-year Treasury Management Report and year-end report. And I think you did say that there were going to be 2 reports each year. So unless we do have anyone who wants to come in now, I would just like to say that the committee has noted and accepted the recommendations as put in your paper. So thank you very much. I'm going to move on then to agenda item 9, the assessment of the robustness of the budget process and the adequacy of reserves. Now, I'm going to ask Peter Davis, who's the responsible financial officer, to present his paper. I'll just make a note in advance that there are a number of recommendations in the paper. I think there are 10. I think when it comes to comments and observations, I'm going to take each of the recommendations in turn. That doesn't mean to say we'll have a long discussion about each one, but I think that might be the best way to structure how we take this paper. So I'll hand over to Mr. Davison to introduce his paper.
Thank you very much, Chair. And first off, I've got to just apologise for the slight late distribution of at least the covering report. It was just as a consequence of the volume of reports that both myself and Jonathan have had to bring through committee as part of the budget process. But yes, I think just at the outset, just to sort of highlight, this is the first time that this committee has received this report, and certainly in this way. However, separately considered on the agenda and latterly on the agenda as part of the audit committee review. One of the things that came from that piece of work was, I think, an acknowledgement and a recommendation that we bring this report through Governance and Audit Committee. I think it just further strengthens the work that the committee's done on a continual basis and in recent years to assess the council's reserve position. What we're looking to do as a further addition to that is certainly for most of the committee, I know, Chair, you don't yourself sit on select committees, so you're slightly one step removed from what select committees will be familiar with and the usual budget consultation. But as part of my role as the Council Section 151 officer, I have a requirement upon me to provide a statement alongside the final budget proposals before they are considered, firstly by Cabinet, and then brought into Council for approval. I have to make a statement on both the robustness of the budget process and adequacy of reserves. So that is appended to the report, marked as Appendix 1, but apologies if I think you picked it up, Chair. I've left a legacy appendix number from the paper that's going as part of the final budget proposals on Wednesday. But therein lies my statement.
I think that what you've just said, Mr. Davis, is your Appendix 1 is actually in effect the one that was marked Appendix F.
Appendix
That's
F.
right, isn't it?
Correct. And that is what sits behind and what is going to sit behind the final budget proposals that Cabinet will consider on Wednesday. And those proposals will then make their way on to Council on Thursday for final consideration and approval. As you've helpfully outlined already, Chair, there is, and I've purposely done this in terms of listed out the recommendations because I wanted to make it clear to the committee all the various aspects of the report, and I guess the key messages that were coming from my assessment. So they're outlined there, and I'll probably just come back to those just to sort of quickly go back through them and just to reinforce a few points. I think just in terms of the actual statement that I make myself, it comprises two aspects. Firstly, it touches on the budget process itself and the underlying risks that carry their way through the budget process and in fact beyond and over the medium term. So for those who've looked over Appendix 1, a lot of those risks should be quite familiar to you. They're the challenges that face not just this local authority, but many local authorities across the UK, and they won't be a surprise. And they clearly have a bearing on a lot of the decisions that we have to make as part of the budget process. And you know, this year, unlike not dissimilar to others, we've had to manage a very significant amount of budget pressure into the budget process. We're obviously coming off the back of the pandemic, and that's bringing its own pressures on services at the same time. And we've also had to be very thoughtful in terms of the level of savings that we've been able to bring forward as a council. I think we were fortunate, very fortunate, in fact, to benefit very well by way of the Welsh Government's funding settlement for local government, and I think we were the highest funded council, certainly by way of increase, and yet we still, as Councillor Murphy well knows, we still remain rooted to the bottom of the foot in terms of funding per capita as a council. I think members of the committee will know, we sit on probably on the end of the spectrum, unlike some other councils where we have a pretty low base in terms of reserves, and obviously and therefore things will always remain challenging for the council in terms of making ends meet. But I think just in terms of covering off on budget process, hopefully members of the committee, and I'm not going to go through that element of my statement, but I think members of the committee should hopefully be familiar and should comfort themselves, I guess, from all of the arrangements that we have in place to make sure that the budget proposals that come forward, are on very robust footing. We've taken a full and proper assessment of risk. We've looked to mitigate those as best as we are able to, and therein lies the proposals that Cabinet will consider on Wednesday. In terms of the reserves position, I guess what I've gone and looked to do for this time round now with this new report is to capitalise, I guess, on what the committee has been familiar and used to in the past. I have extended that to make reference to capital receipts. Jonathan was helpfully, I guess, in the way that we've sequenced the agenda today. He's helpfully already talked about the relationship between our capital programme and our Treasury activities, and certainly within the capital programme, capital receipts are a very important funding source for us. As much as our reserve cover is for both the revenue and the capital budget. I've tried to sort of outline, because I guess it's coincidental, I think, that we've chosen to bring this report through at the end of an administrative term. So in that respect, and in 3.15 of the report, I have done that backward look over the 5 years of the administrative term. And prior to that as well, to when we started capturing this information from 2008-9, when obviously the recession hit. So I think what can be seen is that we've been able to restore earmark reserves, certainly in the last year, and undoubtedly it'll be the case again this year, and I'll come on to that now in a moment. In terms of the council fund balance, which is the council's general reserve, our assessment and my assessment now at the going into the end of this year is that we sit ourselves in the middle of SIPFA's sort of range of reasonable limits. So we sit within that, right in the middle of that 4 to 6% indicator of net spend. Certainly in terms of school balance, I think if you took me back 2 years, 3 years, then probably myself and Jonathan would probably maintain some real level of concern in terms of school balances. Prior to the pandemic, we were actually in a situation where the totality of our school balances were actually in net deficit. We've benefited significantly through Welsh Government funding and grant funding over the last 2 years, and reserves. Certainly the most recent forecast for month 9 for school balances is forecasting that we will see approximately £4.1 million of school balances held at the end of this year. And then in terms of usable capital receipts, and I guess context is everything, and John helpfully pointed some of this out earlier. When you actually take the 5-year look back over the administrative term, we've actually it looks on the face of it, and it is in fact the case that our usable capital receipts are going to be at an increased level going into the end of this financial year. However, Jonathan is absolutely right to point out the challenges that we've got over the next 5 years, and in terms of the delay in the local development plan, the replacement LDP, and that's going to certainly have a detrimental impact on our ability to generate capital receipts. And furthermore, and that'll be for Treasury decisions, I guess, to determine as to whether we either draw down on borrowing or in fact we actually look to draw on our usable capital receipts to fund what is the next very significant investment this council is going to make in a replacement school in Abergavenny as part of the Banby 21st Century Schools programme. So I think on assessment from a 151 perspective, I was not expecting to be here at this point on the 28th of February 2022. If you'd have asked me just as we were going into lockdown in March 2020 as to what state I thought our reserves were going to be in, I would not have ever suggested that we would have been in the situation that we're in. The credit there goes certainly to UK government, to Welsh government in terms of the funding that they have been able to make available to us to offset the very significant pressures that we've had to face in the interim, and in fact go further and above and beyond, which has again, as I've explained, allowed us to reserve to restore some of our reserve cover. The final point I just wanted to make really is one around the medium term, and I'm very happy to. I mean, John can come in and offer his own view alongside mine if he so wishes, because we work so very closely together on the medium-term financial plan and the budget process. But as is always the case, the medium-term financial plan highlights deficits. I think we are carrying some notable risks into next year around things like homelessness, in terms of potential for leisure centre income not to return to where it got to. We've got some significant risks around adult social care, where we're uncertain as to whether the level of budget cover we've got at the moment is going to be sufficient. So suitable and sufficient reserve cover is going to be really important in that regard. And I think the bolstering of earmark reserves is really going to help in that respect. I think when you look beyond 22-23, that's where I think the council needs to undertake some further work. And I think for those of you who've looked at the report over, the opportunity for us to do that coming off the back of a current administration and then going into new one in May. That new administration will obviously look to produce a new corporate plan for the next electoral term, the next administrative term. That corporate plan will outline the aspirations, aims and objectives of the administration for that forward 5-year period. And the medium-term financial planning process needs to work in tandem with that. Clearly, we've got to make sure that we're on a sustainable footing, and equally that we're able to enable the administration to take forward its own agenda. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the corporate plan will inform the MTFP and vice versa. So I would expect certainly going through it into the summer and into the early autumn period that I think myself and Jonathan are going to be doing a lot of work doing a full development of the medium-term financial plan. Coupled with that will be a rationalisation of reserves to make sure our reserves are aligned, with our key budgetary risks and where the administration needs to invest to further its policy aims and objectives. So, Chair, I think that that is the essence of the report. The recommendations speak to hopefully what I've covered off in the main. I don't know whether Chair Jonathan wishes to come in at all to offer any particular comment, or otherwise Jonathan can come in and assist with any questions that might come, Chair. But I'm happy to sort of hand back over to you, and if you do wish me to go back through the recommendations, I'm happy to do that, but they're as read as currently stands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Davies. I will just invite Jonathan Davies, just if he wants to make a contribution at this point.
Thanks, Chair. I think Peter's gone through that whole report in detail, and I think certainly you know, our recent improvement in reserves has very much been from the benefit of grant funding from Welsh Government. But I think the other key thing to just outline is that, you know, we do have a really good track record of budget discipline in Monmouthshire. You know, we very much start the year with the expectation that we will not overspend, and I think we're seeing the fruits of that with the recent improvement in reserve levels. You know, yes, we've received significant grant funding, but we've also you know, mitigated a lot of those pressures that have come on stream for us. So I think it's an important point that sits alongside the details that Peter's outlined. So I think that's probably it from me, Chair, and happy to come in as needed further.
Right, thank you, Jonathan. Before I invite any questions or comments from the committee members, I'll just note the impression I got of the important business here, that the Governance and Audit Committee is being asked to endorse the position put forward, the assessment of the robustness of the budget process, which is largely there in Appendix 1. Or headed up Appendix F. Now, I was knowing that the committee is well briefed on Treasury matters and generally on the medium-term financial plan, so I feel that the committee is well placed to have to make a judgment on what's being presented today. I was less sure on the budget setting, because that doesn't tend to come before the committee, but then I've been reassured that many members on the committee are on various scrutiny committees which would have been involved in putting together the budget before it was finalised, so we should be well placed for that. But in terms of asking for comments and observations, I'm going to put it to each of the recommendations from the paper. So if we look at the first recommendation, that the Governance and Audit Committee scrutinises and endorses the responsible financial officer's opinion on the robustness of the budget process and the adequacy of the reserves as given out in the appendix paper. And this will be allowed for a verbal update to be provided to Cabinet on the 2nd of March and to Council on the 3rd of March. And I will be attending Council for this item on the 3rd of March. So do we have any comments or observations on the responsible financial officer's opinion on the robustness of the budget process and the adequacy of the reserves? Right, I think we've got Councillor Eason.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, yes, thank you, Peter and Jonathan. I'm pleased to see the reserves are running into the 20 millions. But one question is about the school reserves, and I noticed that Chepstow School has got a deficit of nearly £300,000, whereas all the other schools, other than Landogo, which we understand their concerns up there, is there a robust recovery plan in place for Chepstow School? Because that seems to be an outrider on all these figures is very, very high, really, compared to the rest of them. Thank you, Chair.
Don't know if we've got an immediate answer to that.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that, and I think Councillor Eason would expect me to have picked that up as part of my quality assurance when seeing through the month 9 forecast that recently went to Cabinet, as much as obviously presiding over the budget. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Chepstow School being one of those 2 schools, I've sought my own reassurances through from Nikki Wellington, Finance Manager in Children and Young People's, from the Chief Officer, and had some brief discussion with the cabinet member as well, Councillor Paul Pavia, about it. So I'm comfortable that to your question, Councillor Reeson, there is a robust recovery plan in place. I'm expecting the deficit to actually reduce further going up into the year end. And I know that there are plans in place to bring that back in an orderly way over the next couple of years. So yes, I'm comforted from my end.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Councillor Phil Murphy would like to come in.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and I can add a little bit to that along with Councillor Pavia. I'm heading up the challenge into the school recovery plan there. They do suffer from capitation. There is a problem with the number of pupils there. If that increases, which we've got a lot of plans to try and achieve, then it will become that much easier. But yes, there is as Peter Davis said, there is a recovery plan in place, and Councillor Pavia and I, together with the finance officers in CYP, are keeping a very close eye on that. The only other point I put my hand up for was just to mention the capitalisation directives. Unless I missed it, I don't think Peter covered that. We have been using capital receipts to bolster up the revenue budget, where items regarding service redesign apply. That is not a sustainable way of going forward. It's something we've been allowed to do for a little while now, but it's something that we're going to have to phase out soon. So that's just another one of the problems facing us in the medium term. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do we have any more comments or observations in regard to recommendation, the first recommendation? If not, then I think we can record that the committee has scrutinised and endorsed the responsible financial officer's opinion on the robustness of the budget process and the adequacy of the reserves. The next recommendation was that the committee should note the forecast use of reserves for 22-23 and for future years as summarised in table 1 of the report and detailed in Appendix 2. And we'll note that the reference to Appendix 2 is to what's marked as Appendices 2A and 2B in the attachments to Appendix 1 or Appendix F. Although the reference to table 1 at 3.22 is clear. So noting the forecast usage of reserves for 22-23 and for future years, do we have any comments or observations on that recommendation?
Chair, unless there aren't any questions, any point to make on it, I think it's just to reinforce the piece of work that will come up in by way of a latter recommendation. But that forecast use of reserves, certainly across the medium term, is just based on what is currently known, and clearly as the budget process evolves, the medium-term financial planning process evolves, I would naturally expect that to change as well. And in turn, that'll come back into the committee anyway for subsequent consideration.
Thank you. Right, well, I'm not getting any further interventions, so I think we can conclude then that the committee has noted the forecast use for reserves for 22-23 for future years as summarised in the report. The third recommendation is that the committee should note the extent of forecast improvements in school balances summarised in Table 2 and detailed in Appendix 3, which is informed and driven by the extent to which significant and unprecedented late grant support provided by the Welsh Government to schools at the end of 2021 exceeded the impact of school investment plans, and notably further receipt of unbudgeted Welsh Government grant support was received at the end of 21-22. And I think in the paper itself, these items are covered, I think, in paragraph 312 to 330, unless Mr. Davis would want to correct me on that. So do we have any comments or observations on that third recommendation? Either way.
The only input here is something that Jonathan relayed onto me ahead of the drafting of the report, and it was a point well made actually, that notwithstanding obviously the significant uplift in school balances, it's important to note that the general pattern of decline in school balances over time, i.e. if you actually unwound the very significant one-off grant support, we still have that underlying issue just in terms of schools operating beyond their means, and it's not a critique, it's just highlights some of the underlying challenges. So we just need to have regard to that, I guess, as we move forward and across the medium term.
Thank you. Well, I'm not getting anything further on that. So I think we can accept that the committee has noted the extent of forecast improvements in school balances as summarised and detailed in the report, with the rest of the recommendation there. The fourth recommendation is that the committee acknowledges the restoration of the general and earmarked reserve balances over the administrative term of the council has enabled balances to be stabilised in line with the reserves protocol approved by Cabinet in 2015, albeit in light of risks that remain over the medium term, which to the extent that they cannot be mitigated will draw further on limited one-off reserve and usable capital receipts balances. I think this might be mainly covered in paragraphs from 337 on. Well, there's no, that's school balances, sorry. It's really all the references in the paper to the reserves. Reserve activity starts at 320. Any comments, observations or questions? Don't seem to be getting anything. I think we can record that the committee have acknowledged the restoration of general and earmarked reserve balances and the rest of the recommendation. Fifth recommendation, that the committee notes the current reserve strategy and approach that looks to ensure that reserve cover is put in place for budgetary risks remaining for 22-23 and from a forecast underspend for 21-22.
Just wanted to emphasise something here. I'm not sure whether Councillor Murphy in his position as cabinet member wants to make any comment, but I think the important point to make here is that the budget strategy, certainly for 22-23, and given some of those noted and significant risks that we're carrying into next year that aren't incorporated into our budgets, and as I've previously mentioned, around things such as homelessness, adult social care, leisure centre income, etc. We've been very cognizant as the final budget proposals have been coming together of the, again, significant specific grant funding coming through from Welsh Government. That, together with the budget recovery action that Jonathan Davis mentioned earlier, has meant that our in-year position is now moving from one of deficit to one of surplus, and it's that surplus that we are now aware of that has allowed us to, with some level of comfort, to be able to put the final budget proposals together, but to know that we will be putting some further money into reserves to act as cover against those known and likely risks, such that if they do materialise, that we won't have immediate recourse to instigate any significant budget recovery action.
There is a further point there, if I can come in, Chair.
Yes, sure.
Yeah, is that the big one there is the potential for wage increases. We have built in what we anticipate into the budget, but any further wage increases that which we will be obliged to implement will have to be managed, and that will be done in the way that Peter's just described.
Thank you. Right, well, we'll record that the committee has considered that recommendation and duly noted. The next recommendation is that the committee should note the council fund balance sits in the middle range of the 4 to 6% indicator considered by the council's 151 officer to be an acceptable and prudent level. We've had this 4 to 6% range now for some time, I believe, but is there any comments or observations at this point? If not, then I'll say that the item has been duly noted. Seventh recommendation, that the committee has regard to the declining usable and one-off capital receipt balances to continue to support the council's capital maintenance and investment plans, most recently used to meet revenue costs associated with service reform under Welsh Government guidance. I think, in fact, one of Councillor Murphy's interventions did address this point. Any comments or observations on that?
Nothing other than what I said before, Chair.
Thank you. Right, we don't have any comments or observations on that. So we'll record that the committee has regard to the issues in that recommendation. Recommendation, the eighth one, to note the current usage of useful capital receipts is not sustainable, and to the extent balances are depleted, Council will need to have recourse to unsupported borrowing to finance its future capital plans, and to the extent that other grants and contributions are not available. Anything on that one? So I will conclude that it was duly noted. Recommendation 9, that a review of reserves policy is undertaken and brought back to the Governance and Audit Committee for consideration before being considered for adoption by Cabinet subsequent to the 2021-22 outturn, and in readiness for the budget strategy and plan for 23-24 and over the medium-term financial plan period. That's really saying that the committee is asking for the reserves policy to be reviewed and reports to be brought back to the committee. Don't know if we have any further comments on that.
We would do that anyway, Chair, but yeah, duly noted.
So I think it should be recorded that the committee has made that request. As Councillor Murphy has just pointed out, a lot of these items are things that the committee has been considering over time in regular reports, so not necessarily new business here. And that the committee requests that consideration is given to strengthening compliance with SIPF's financial management code, over which the committee needs to preside. I'm not quite sure where that comes from. Could you elaborate on that, do you think, Mr. Davies?
Yeah, apologies. It was my oversight actually in not making reference to this in my opening address. So with the paper, there are two specific recommendations that feature within the paper later on the agenda to do with the audit committee review. One of those was in terms of my opinion on the robustness of reserves, i.e. recommendation 1 coming to the committee. The second one, in fact, which is relevant here, is to do with a request that I guess officers undertake some consideration of SIPF's financial management code, and just by way of a means of further strengthening or considering any scope to further strengthen our existing arrangements. So I will be looking to work with Jonathan to sort of assess that, and as to whether there's sufficient value to be gained from that piece of work. So I wanted to draw it out here because it does actually link back to that piece around the robustness of the budget process, and it's something just to have regard to for the future.
Any further comments or observations on that from members? I think we can accept then that the committee has requested that consideration be given to strengthening compliance with SIPF's financial management code. In which case, I'd like to thank everyone involved in putting together these detailed matters and providing us with the recommendations for us to look at. So I'm going to move on now to the next agenda item, which is a paper on whole authority customer feedback to be presented by Annette Evans, the Customer Relations Manager. So would you like to introduce your paper, Annette?
Yes, good afternoon, Chair and members. This is the whole authority feedback for the period April 2020 until March 2021. So for those who may not be familiar with the whole authority complaints procedure, we follow the Ombudsman's model for dealing with complaints. There's two stages to the complaints procedure. The first one is that we try and sort out things as much as possible at the first stage. If that's not possible, then the complainants can take their complaint to the formal investigation stage. And then if they're still not happy after that, they can go on to the Ombudsman. Some matters we deal with as comments rather than registering as a formal complaint. This is where customers tell us about a problem that requires fixing, but that they don't want to go through a complaints procedure. Work is currently underway to improve processes in areas where officers have identified the highest volume of service requests relating to services, such as missed bins. And this involves a selection of staff from different departments who are testing potential improvements before they are rolled out across the authority. Another thing that we're doing is that we've just reviewed the customer care standards, and they're going to be relaunched soon. There'll be a training programme for staff in customer facing roles, and then that'll be rolled out then across the authority. This report doesn't cover social services complaints. This is just whole authority complaints, as social services complaints are dealt with through the select committees, the children, young people and adult select committees. So for this period, 2020 one, we had 158 complaints, 379 comments and 204 compliments. There were 17 complaints that we formally investigated, and there were 2 complainants that went on to the Ombudsman after the formal investigation. The Ombudsman decided not to investigate. We did agree on an early resolution on 1 complaint. So the services that I receive the most complaints about are waste and street services, planning, highways, sorts of things, you know, the waste miscollections, non-collection of garden waste. There were some issues with staff behaviour. Planning, then there were matters related to planning applications, lack of consultation, issues around communication with the department. Highways issues, there were lots of issues regarding the one-way systems with the town traffic and the reopening of roads during the pandemic, and the delays to work that was undertaken, as well as lack of communication again. There were other issues regarding lack of replies. There were issues about making online payments, noise nuisance. So they were the sort of things that I dealt with through that process. With regard to the formal complaints, the majority of them were related to planning matters. But when we investigated those complaints at the formal stage, the majority of them were not upheld. And then we go on to comments. There were 379 comments, and you know, this was up quite significantly on the previous year. But this is because we were dealing with all of this through the pandemic. There were lots of issues, again, about waste and street services, highways. For instance, you know, the HWRC sites were closed during the pandemic. People were not happy about that. Some waste wasn't collected for all sorts of different reasons. There were lots of traffic calming measures in place, the road repairs. So all of these comments, you know, stacked up. But aside from that, we did get 204 compliments. So even though we had all those issues, you know, people still took the time to get in touch with us to thank us, you know, for again, the issues that we've dealt with through the complaints and comments. They were complimenting us about those services, the waste and the highway services. We've got, with regard to our response time scales, we have 10 working days for dealing with stage 1s, and we have 20 working days for dealing with stage 2s, plus another 10 days for heads of service to respond. So we didn't do too badly in trying to stick to those timescales. We also get requests for service, and they are logged and they are sent on to the appropriate departments for them to deal with. When we have all these complaints and comments, we do try and learn. We try and see what we can do to improve services. As I said earlier, we know with that piece of work that's going on across the council. But any recommendations that we do get with regard to formal investigations, they put into an action plan, and we do follow up with the service to make sure that those recommendations in the formal investigations are acted upon. We do give apologies, you know, where is needed, where is required. And as I've said in my commentary, really, you know, we were dealing with all of this while there was a pandemic going on, so it was quite extraordinary services. And in fairness to those front-facing services, you know, they were dealing with their day-to-day work plus trying to respond to us with the complaints and comments that we were receiving. So I hope that that gives you a flavour of the whole authority complaints, comments and compliments report for the period 2020 to 21.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. I'll just say that I'll invite anyone who, any members of the committee who wish to ask any questions or make any points to indicate by raising their hand on the app. I thought that the commentary at the end of your paper was interesting, referring to conditions pertaining during the lockdown period. And it certainly seems likely that 2020-21 was exceptional in that regard. I think that should be noted. Right, well, I'm just waiting to see if anybody wants to speak. Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just going to say I thought it was a very comprehensive report, and that you've gone into a lot of detail. I'm amazed that we didn't have more complaints, given the problems that were being encountered during that period. And it was nice to see that we had a lot of compliments as well. So all in all, it's a good report covering a very difficult period. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else would like to come in? If not, I'll just note the recommendation that members use the report to seek assurance about the effectiveness of the authority's processes for dealing with complaints and compliments. And I think we can say that that has been done today. So thank you very much, Annette Evans, the Customer Relations Manager. I'll move on then to the next item on the agenda, which is the Governance and Audit Committee review and changes. And this is to be introduced, I believe, by Mr. Davis, the Deputy Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully this one will be a little bit more straightforward to walk yourself and the committee through, and given the fact that what the report is in effect capturing is the output, I guess, and the outcomes from fundamentally two things. Number one, the changes that some of which have taken effect, some of which will take effect now in May as a consequence of the Local Government and Elections Bill, and the additional requirements that fall upon the Governance and Audit Committee. Richard Jones has already helpfully and earlier on the agenda talked to some of those requirements now around self-evaluation. I guess the primary change that we're all familiar with in terms of those changes is with regards to the number of laypersons on the committee, and obviously yourself, Chair, as the layperson chair, and who's been in place through the course of this administration. Come May, we will have a requirement to have 4 laypersons. Andrew Wathen, our Chief Internal Auditor, has sort of overseen and in working with yourself, Chair, and others on the panel. We've been through a process of recruitment. I believe we've got 3 out of the 4 now confirmed in terms of the layperson appointments. And there will be, I think, a further, probably more localised recruitment now over the coming weeks to look to secure that 4th and final place. But the report talks to those important changes, and that I've been away from committee. I've been through with the committee, so that all are familiar. And then the second substantive part of the report is in effect to, and hopefully I've done, I think what is contained in the report is a faithful representation of the feedback that initially Andrew got as Chief Internal Auditor when he undertook the last regularised sort of questionnaire of the committee on its effectiveness, together with the workshop that we ran in the autumn, just to get feedback or to provide feedback from some of the initial discussions that we'd had with officers, to share those with the committee and to get their views on it. And the report simply talks to the strengths of what is already a well-functioning audit committee under your stewardship, Chair. And that's been the case throughout, but as is always the case, there's always opportunity to improve things further. The report has sort of highlighted, I guess, some of the things, some of the constructive feedback that we received, and then latterly in the report, outlined within that then is a set of proposed recommendations, which I propose on the basis of this, this being agreed by the committee as a faithful representation of the matters discussed and the recommendations brought forward. I will take an action away, and if everything is approved as read, I will take what is Andrew's current action plan from the last questionnaire that was undertaken, and I will incorporate those further recommendations into it. And then obviously on that basis, myself and Andrew, together with other officers, we will look to take those forward. Some of those will be worked upon in readiness for May. Others of those recommendations will be for work for us to do with new committee members when they're in place, once we get to May. So I'm very happy to go into the detail of the report if you need me to, Chair, but I thought best not to need to do that on the basis that the committee is obviously very familiar, I think, with its content.
I think that's correct, Mr. Davis. For committee members have been involved in the most recent sessions in which we considered the changes to the committee. I feel that a lot of the new statutory duties of the committee have been considered appropriate business for the Governance and Audit Committee, have always really been considered appropriate business. So no changes there so far as this authority is concerned. I'm happy to accept any more contributions or observations from members of the committee. Please indicate if you wish to comment. I'll just note the recommendations that have been put before us. Members of the committee to acknowledge the changes brought about by the Local Government Elections and Wales Act insofar as the impact on the Governance and Audit Committee as outlined in the report. That the committee endorses the further considerations proposed that look to further strengthen the effectiveness of the committee going forward, have resulted from the latest self-assessment by members of the committee and the subsequent overarching review undertaken, and that the Constitution be amended to reflect these changes to take effect at the next annual general meeting in May. Peter Davis, are you wanting to come in again?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And it was only because I've just observed that there's one matter that we discussed on the pre-meeting, if you remember, with Richard Jones, which I think is probably useful just to highlight here because it just allows us to capture it in the minutes, and just to confirm back to the rest of the committee that I will be looking to pick this up with Hazel Eilert, the scrutiny coordinator, in the next day or two, and ahead of council on Thursday. So I think, Chair, I think there was an acknowledgement that I guess, Chair, unlike obviously standing members of the council who sit on the committee, I think there's probably just an opportunity for us to identify the most appropriate means by which you can keep abreast of council business, and I guess in a position of chair and with your successor to ensure that they're abreast of the select committee programmes more widely, and given the fact that there is a paper going into council on Thursday to repurpose the select committee structure. So it feels to me that there is an opportunity to reconsider informally or formally something that might be something closely aligned to what used to be the coordinating board, which no longer, which currently doesn't stand at the moment. So I think, Chair, if you might want to just offer comment on that, but if you contend for me to do so, then maybe we can just capture that and in the minutes so that I can subsequently take that up with officers ahead of the council meeting on Thursday.
Yeah, I have mentioned the relationships between the lay member on the audit committee and the rest of the council being at the business at various points. I chose not to raise it again today, but I acknowledge that we did discuss this recently, and I think my view is that especially with the changes to the scrutiny committees and the setting up of this performance and overview scrutiny committee, the relationship between the governance and audit committee and the new committees needs to be taken into consideration in future decisions. That's really no more to add to it than that.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. In which case, if there are no further contributions or observations from committee members, it should be noted that the committee accepts the recommendations put to us today on this item. The next item on the agenda is the internal audit progress report for Q3 21-22. The author of this one is Andrew Wathen. Is there anyone? Yes, you're with us today. Good. Do you wish to introduce your report? Andrew Wathen, of course, is the Chief Internal Auditor.
Thank you, Chairman. Okay, thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, Chairman. Good afternoon, members. Can you see my video, Chairman?
Yes, you're on. You're on.
Okay,
you did
great.
Drop out there for a second, but you're on.
Thank you. Okay, so this is one of the regular reports I bring to Governance and Audit Committee. It's twofold. It's in relation to me as Chief Internal Auditor, providing you as members some assurance or otherwise on the adequacy of the internal control environment, the governance arrangements we have in place, and the risk management processes we have in place within Monmouthshire, and also to make you aware of the performance of the internal audit team. The period this relates to is Q3, so for the year, the month ending 31st of December 2021, and relates to the first 9 months of the financial year. So hopefully members will be familiar with the format of this report, but happy to take any questions at the end as normal. I won't go into too much detail, but just to make you aware, as a bit of background, that as a result of the pandemic, the team were tasked with doing other jobs in terms of test, trace and protect, and also to deal with the anti-fraud situation with the government grants that came through. So that impacted on the team's ability to cover the plan, and that rolled into 2021-22. One of the team was also seconded out to support the COVID-19 Business Grants Administration, and this member subsequently left the team. We've replaced the team member, and the new member started in November. So we're working through a training program to get that individual auditor up to speed. And also, as the report states, at the time of me presenting this report, my audit manager, David Walton, would have subsequently left the organisation. He started working for a new organisation last Monday, and that will obviously have an impact in terms of our workload moving forward for the next quarter and completion of the audit work in line with the agreed audit plan, which members have already seen for 21-22. As a result of the pandemic, we as an audit team have not been able to go out and do as many site visits as we envisaged, and also obviously that has an impact on our ability to complete the work in line with the plan as well. So the audit opinion at the year end is accumulation of all the 4 quarter reports I present to members, and that'll be based on the opinion work that we bring together, and it will be outlined in this report and subsequent reports that bring to committee's attention. Since the start of the financial year 21-22, we've issued 34 audit jobs to draft stage, and 8 of those are opinion related. Excuse me, in addition to doing some grant claim work and counter fraud work with government grants and the National Fraud Initiative. So those 8 opinions, we had 3 substantial assurance, 2 considerable assurance, 2 reasonable assurance, and 1 limited assurance opinion. That limited will be reported into Audit Committee in due course. We've also been doing some work on our progress of the implementation of internal audit recommendations, which again has been reported into committee previously, it's been reported into SLT, just to make sure that the service managers are addressing the issues which we pick up in our audits and are acting on them and are implementing the recommendations. So overall, the service, there's improvement, there's demonstrable improvement in the service provision. We've outlined the audit opinions in the appendix, which I'll come on to in a moment. And of the work that was outstanding at the end of 2021, that's all been completed and finalised. In terms of the performance of the team, then at the end of December, we've completed 40% of the agreed audit plan, which is slightly below target, which I'll come on to in a moment. Draft reports are being issued within 6 days against a target of 15 days, and final reports are being issued within 4 days against a target of 10 days, which is an improvement of where we've been in previous years. One of the main reasons that we've completed less of the audit plan than we would have hoped to by this stage of the year is that, as I said previously, one of the auditors was seconded out of the team and then subsequently left. Within the plan, we allocated 9 audit jobs for that particular auditor up to the end of the quarter, and if all of those had been completed and issued as draft reports, then overall we would have completed 51% of the agreed plan, with a target being 50%. What I did just before David left was we got together to work out what we could feasibly complete to draft report stage by the end of the year to give members assurance that we could give an overall opinion. And we estimated that we would complete around 65% of the agreed audit plan. That was before I knew David was leaving. So without an audit manager on board, that could reduce a little bit, but I'll be working on a recruitment process to make sure we get that audit manager on board as soon as we possibly can going into the new financial year. As a result of the audit manager leaving, I've also been involved in the planning process, which we've started for 22-23, and information has gone out to all directorates and all chief officers asking for their input in terms of shaping that audit plan, and I'll come back to Audit Committee in due course. We also mentioned that we're involved with the National Fraud Initiative, and we coordinate that on behalf of Monmouthshire, and we also undertake some testing of the data matches to make sure that there is minimal fraud within the organisation. To give members assurance, where we have limited assurance opinions, that means there needs to be significant improvement in the way things are operated and the systems are managed within service areas. I report separately to Governance and Audit Committee on that, and we endeavour to actually do a follow-up of those reviews, so a second audit within a 12-month timescale, and again that will be reported back to Governance and Audit Committee. In terms of the detail, I'll just quickly go through Appendix 1. That outlines the audit opinions that I've mentioned, the 8 which we've issued at the end of December, and the following table details what the individual job was and which directorate that was undertaken in. That gives the individual audit opinion, substantial, considerable, reasonable, or limited. Also done some work on grant claims, which were unqualified, which is a good place to be, rather than qualified. and we've also undertaken some work on non-opinion, but importantly, value-added work across the organisation. As mentioned before, Appendix 2 outlines the opinions which we currently use within our audit reports, along with the description of what we see as a risk. So a significant risk, a moderate risk, or a minor risk, or a strength. And the reports are based on a balance of strengths and weaknesses. The more strengths that the report has, the more positive opinion it has. And conversely, if there are more significant issues, and there are more recommendations that will be made to make improvements. Mentioned the performance of the team, which is in Appendix 3. I've done a quarter-on-quarter comparison, Chairman, rather than a year-on-year comparison because of the impact of COVID in 2021. And that outlines the key performance indicators we have within the team at the moment. Mentioned most of them as we go through, and that there are others which are reasonably positive. So on that basis, Chairman, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. Now, we note the recommendation is for the committee to note the audit opinions issued. That the committee note progress made by section towards meeting the 21-22 operational audit plan and the section's performance at the 9-month stage of the financial year. We've got a comment from a question from Councillor Smith. So if you'd like to come in.
Very briefly, Chairman, have we managed to replace the member of staff who left, or are we advertising?
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Councillor. We've replaced the auditor. Then a new auditor started with us in November. We haven't yet gone out to advertise the audit manager's job, but that is in progress at the moment.
Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would have thought reasonable progress in the face of the pandemic and secondments, promotions, and all the other issues you've had to deal with. Do we have any further comments or observations from committee members? If not, we'll note that the committee has noted the audit opinions issues and noted progress made. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Watson. The next item on the agenda is the forward work plan. Now, we know that the anti-bribery risk assessment has been deferred. And I also believe that the annual performance review of the investment committee has been rescheduled. Are any other changes that anyone would like to advise the committee about at this point? Mr. Davis?
Hi, Chair. Just to confirm on that latter item, just in terms of the review of the investment committee, that will come forward subsequent to the election period. We've taken some advice internally, and it wouldn't be suitable for that to be considered during the pre-election period, which is when the next meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee is on the 31st of March. The anti-bribery report's absolutely fine though, and that will be coming forward on the 31st of March meeting.
Thank you for that. I'll move on then to the minutes of the meeting on the 13th of January. We have to say whether we think this is a true and accurate record.
Happy to move, Chair.
Happy to accept that. Have we got a second?
Second, Chair. Second.
Thank you. Thank you. So we've accepted the minutes of the meeting held on 13th of January. And I'll just note the date of the next meeting is the 31st of March. And I understand this will go ahead despite being in the pre-election period. So it just remains for me to say thank you very much, everybody, for all your contributions today. And we'll be convening again as a committee on the 31st of March. So thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.